the responsibility to teach and the freedom to learn, and the guarantee of equal opportunity for all are essential to the achievement of these principles. The professional educator acknowledges the worth and dignity of every person and demonstrates the pursuit of truth and devotion to excellence, acquires knowledge, and nurtures democratic citizenship. The educator exemplifies a commitment to the teaching and learning processes with accountability to the students, maintains professional growth, exercises professional judgment, and personifies integrity. The educator strives to maintain the respect and confidence of colleagues, students, parents and legal guardians, and the community, and to serve as an appropriate role model. Protects students from conditions within the educator's control that circumvent learning, or are detrimental to the health and safety of students. Maintains an appropriate relationship with students in all settings, does not encourage, solicit, or engage in a sexual or romantic relationship with students nor touch a student in an inappropriate way for personal gratification, with intent to harm, or out of anger. Evaluates students and assigns grades based upon the students' demonstrated competencies and performance. Disciplines students justly and fairly and does not deliberately embarrass or humiliate them. Holds in confidence information learned in professional practice except for professional reasons or in compliance with pertinent regulations or statutes. Refuses to accept significant gifts, favors, or additional compensation that might influence or appear to influence professional decisions or actions. Utilizes available resources to provide a classroom climate conducive to learning and to promote learning to the maximum possible extent. Acknowledges the diverse views of students, parents and legal guardians, and colleagues as they work collaboratively to shape educational goals, policies, and decisions, does not proselytize for personal viewpoints that are outside the scope of professional practice. Signs a contract in good faith and does not abandon contracted professional duties without a substantive reason. Participates actively in professional decision-making processes and supports the expression of professional opinions and judgments by colleagues in decision-making processes or due process proceedings. Acts fairly, consistently, and prudently in the exercise of authority with colleagues, subordinates, students, and parents and legal guardians. Evaluates the work of other educators using appropriate procedures and established statutes and regulations, protects the rights of others in the educational setting, and does not retaliate, coerce, or intentionally intimidate others in the exercise of rights protected by law, recommend persons for employment, promotion, or transfer according to their professional qualifications, the needs and policies of the LEA, and according to the law. Provides accurate credentials and information regarding licensure or employment and does not knowingly assist others in providing untruthful information. Takes action to remedy an observed violation of the Code of Ethics for North Carolina educators and promotes understanding of the principles of professional ethics. Pursues growth and development in the practice of the profession and uses that knowledge in improving the educational opportunities, experiences, and performance of students and colleagues. The purpose of these rules is to establish and uphold uniform standards of professional conduct for licensed professional educators throughout the state. These rules shall be binding on every person licensed by the SBE, hereinafter referred to as educator or professional educator, and the possible consequences of any willful breach shall include license suspension or revocation. The prohibition of certain conduct in these rules shall not be interpreted as approval of conduct not specifically cited. The standards listed in this section shall be generally accepted for the education profession and shall be the basis for state board review of performance of professional educators. These standards shall establish mandatory prohibitions and requirements for educators. Violation of these standards shall subject an educator to investigation and disciplinary action by the S.B.E. or L.E.A. Professional educators shall adhere to the standards of professional conduct contained in this rule. Any intentional act or omission that violates these standards is prohibited. Generally recognized professional standards. The educator shall practice the professional standards of federal, state, and local governing bodies. Personal conduct. The educator shall serve as a positive role model for students, parents, and the community. Because the educator is entrusted with the care and education of small children and adolescents, the educator shall demonstrate a high standard of personal character and conduct. Honesty. The educator shall not engage in conduct involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation in the performance of professional duties, including the following: statement of professional qualifications, application or recommendation for professional employment, promotion, or licensure, application or recommendation for college or university admission, scholarship, grant, academic award, or similar benefit, representation of completion of college or staff development credit, evaluation or grading of students or personnel. Submission of financial or program compliance reports submitted to state, federal, or other governmental agencies. Submission of information in the course of an official inquiry by the employing L.E.A. or the S.B.E. related to facts of unprofessional conduct, provided, however, that an educator shall be given adequate notice of the allegations and may be represented by legal counsel, and submission of information in the course of an investigation by a law enforcement agency, Child Protective Services, or any other agency with the right to investigate regarding school-related criminal activity, provided, however, that an educator shall be entitled to decline to give evidence to law enforcement if such evidence may tend to incriminate the educator, as that term is defined by the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Proper remunerative conduct. The educator shall not solicit current students or parents of students to purchase equipment, supplies, or services from the educator in a private remunerative capacity. An educator shall not tutor for remuneration students currently assigned to the educator's classes, unless approved by the local superintendent. An educator shall not accept any compensation, benefit, or thing of value other than the educator's regular compensation for the performance of any service that the educator is required to render in the course and scope of the educator's employment. This rule shall not restrict performance of any overtime or supplemental services at the request of the L.E.A. Nor shall it apply to or restrict the acceptance of gifts or tokens of minimal value offered and accepted openly from students, parents, or other persons in recognition or appreciation of service. Conduct with students. The educator shall treat all students with respect. The educator shall not commit any abusive act or sexual exploitation with, to, or in the presence of a student, whether or not that student is or has been under the care or supervision of that educator, as defined below. Any use of language that is considered profane, vulgar, or demeaning. Any sexual act. Any solicitation of a sexual act, whether written, verbal, or physical. Any act of child abuse, as defined by law. Any act of sexual harassment, as defined by law, and any intentional solicitation, encouragement, or consummation of a romantic or physical relationship with a student, or any sexual contact with a student. The term romantic relationship shall include dating any student. Confidential information. The educator shall keep in confidence personally identifiable information regarding students or their family members that has been obtained in the course of professional service, unless disclosure is required or permitted by law or professional standards, or is necessary for the personal safety of the student or others. Rights of others. The educator shall not willfully or maliciously violate the constitutional or civil rights of a student, parent, legal guardian, or colleague. Required reports. The educator shall make all reports required by Chapter 115C of the North Carolina General Statutes. Alcohol or controlled substance abuse. The educator shall not be under the influence of, possess, use, or consume on school premises or at a school-sponsored activity or controlled substance as defined by NC General Stat. 9095, the Controlled Substances Act, without a prescription authorizing such use. Be under the influence of, possess, use, or consume an alcoholic beverage or a controlled substance on school premises or at a school-sponsored activity involving students, or furnish alcohol or a controlled substance to any student except as indicated in the professional duties of administering legally prescribed medications. Compliance with criminal laws. The educator shall not commit any act referred to in GS 115C332 and any felony under the laws of the United States or of any state. Public funds and property. The educator shall not misuse public funds or property, funds of a school-related organization, or colleagues' funds. The educator shall account for funds collected from students, colleagues, or parents, legal guardians. The educator shall not submit fraudulent requests for reimbursement, expenses, or pay. Scope of professional practice. The educator shall not perform any act as an employee in a position for which licensure is required by the rules of the S.B.E. or by Chapter 115C or the North Carolina General Statutes during any period in which the educator's license has been suspended or revoked. Conduct related to ethical violations. The educator shall not directly or indirectly use or threaten to use any official authority or influence in any manner that tends to discourage, restrain, interfere with, coerce, or discriminate against any subordinate or any licensee who in good faith reports, discloses, divulges, or otherwise brings to the attention of an L.E.A., the S.B.E., or any other public agency authorized to take remedial action, any facts or information relative to actual or suspected violation of any law regulating the duties of persons serving in the public school system, including but not limited to these rules.
For students to succeed, all school employees and volunteers must approach their responsibilities conscientiously, always remembering that the ultimate responsibility of the school system is to provide students with the opportunity to receive a sound basic education. Be familiar with, support, comply with, and, when appropriate, enforce board policies, administrative procedures, school rules and applicable laws. Attend to the safety and welfare of students, including the need to provide appropriate supervision of students. Demonstrate integrity, respect and commitment to the truth through attitudes, behavior and communications with others. Address or appropriately direct any complaints concerning school employees, the school program or school operations, and support and encourage good school-community relations in all interactions with students, parents and members of the community. Employees or volunteers shall notify the Assistant Superintendent of Operations if they are arrested for, charged with or convicted of a criminal offense, including entering a plea of guilty or nolo contendere, other than a minor traffic violation, that is speeding, parking or a lesser violation. Notice must be in writing, must include all pertinent facts and must be delivered to the Assistant Superintendent of Operations no later than the next scheduled business day following the arrest, charge or conviction, unless the employee or volunteer is hospitalized or incarcerated, in which case the employee or volunteer must report the alleged violation within 24 hours after his or her release. Upon judicial action in the matter, the employee or volunteer must report the disposition and pertinent facts in writing to the Assistant Superintendent of Operations no later than the next business day following the adjudication. Failure by an employee to provide timely notice as described above may lead to disciplinary action up to, and including dismissal. Failure by a volunteer to provide timely notice may result in the revocation of all volunteer privileges for an indefinite period of time.
The Board of Education recognizes that reducing drug and alcohol abuse in the workplace improves the safety, health and productivity of employees. It is the policy of the board that a drug-free and alcohol-free workplace must be maintained. The board prohibits the unlawful manufacture, sale, distribution, dispensing, possession, or use of any narcotic drug, hallucinogenic drug, amphetamine, barbiturate, marijuana, anabolic steroids, alcohol, stimulants, synthetic cannabinoids, counterfeit substances or any other controlled substance as defined in 1. Schedules 1 through 6 of the North Carolina Controlled Substances Act or in 2. Schedules 1 through 5 of Section 202 of the Controlled Substances Act, 21 U.S.C. 812, and further defined by regulation at 21 CFR 1300.01 through 1300.04 and 21 CFR 1308.11 through 1308.15. Employees must not be impaired by the excessive use of prescription or non-prescription drugs. This policy is not violated by an individual's proper use of a drug lawfully prescribed for that individual by a licensed healthcare provider. Employees are prohibited from using or being under the influence of alcohol while acting in the course and scope of employment duties, while at school-sponsored activities or while on school property. This policy does not apply to an employee's consumption of alcoholic beverages that are served at a reception or other similar function that occurs outside the regular workday and that the employee is authorized or required to attend as a part of his or her employment duties. The school system reserves the right to test employees whose duty it is to drive a vehicle, repair vehicles or equipment, provides armed security and other persons in similar safety positions any time prior to or during employment. The system reserves the right to test any employee upon reasonable suspicion of drug or alcohol use. Employees specified above who refuse to submit to any diagnostic test to detect alcohol and/or drug use or refuses to submit to search procedures after reasonable suspicion is established may be suspended immediately pending consideration of a decision to terminate employment. This policy governs each employee before, during or after school hours while the employee is on any property owned or leased by the board, At any time during which the employee is acting in the course and scope of his or her employment with the board, and at any time that the employee's violation of this policy has a direct and adverse effect upon his or her job performance. Independent contractors, volunteers, and visitors are subject to all requirements of this policy while on school property or at a school-sponsored event. An employee may be subjected to a search of his or her person or belongings or of school property under the employee's control if there is reasonable suspicion that the employee has violated this policy. An employee also may be required to submit to a drug or alcohol test when there is reasonable suspicion of drug or alcohol used by the employee in violation of this policy. Reasonable suspicion shall be based on specific, contemporaneous observations concerning the physical, behavioral, speech, and/or performance indicators of drug or alcohol use. The observations must be made by a supervisor or other school system official with training or experience in such indicators. All drug and alcohol testing will be done with procedures that ensure the confidentiality and privacy interests of the employee and in accordance with law. Employees who refuse to submit to a search or a test to detect alcohol or drug use after reasonable suspicion is established may be suspended immediately pending consideration of a decision to terminate employment. In addition, any employee, volunteer, or independent contractor who operates a commercial motor vehicle or performs other safety-sensitive functions in the course of duties for the board may be subject to drug and alcohol testing in accordance with Policy 7241, Drug and Alcohol Testing of Commercial Motor Vehicle Operators. The board will cover the cost of any required employee testing. In accordance with Policy 7300, staff responsibilities: an employee must notify his or her supervisor and the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources in writing of any charge or conviction under any criminal drug statute for a violation occurring within the scope of Paragraph 2 of this policy. Notification must be given not later than the next scheduled business day after such charge or conviction and before reporting to work. Within 10 days of receiving a notice of conviction by an employee whose position is funded in any part by a federal grant, the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources or designee shall notify the funding agency of the conviction. Conviction as used in this policy includes the entry in a court of law or military tribunal of 1. A plea of guilty, nolo contendere, no contest or the equivalent. 2. A verdict or finding of guilty, or 3. A prayer for judgment continued, P.J.C., or a deferred prosecution. Violation of this policy will subject an individual to disciplinary action by the board that could result in non-renewal or termination of employment with the school district or the requirement that the employee participate satisfactorily in a drug or alcohol abuse assistance or rehabilitation program approved by the board or federal, state or local health, law enforcement or other appropriate agency. Information concerning available counseling, rehabilitation and reentry programs will be provided to employees. Any illegal drug activity will be reported to law enforcement authorities. All employees receive a copy of this policy.
The board expects all employees to maintain the highest professional, moral, and ethical standards in their interactions with students. Employees are required to provide an atmosphere conducive to learning through consistently and fairly applied discipline and established and maintained professional boundaries. Employees are expected to motivate each student to perform to his or her capacity while modeling the behavior expected of students and staff-student relationships. The interactions and relationships between staff and students must be based upon cooperation, mutual respect, and an understanding of the appropriate boundaries between adults and students inside and outside of the educational setting. Employees are expected to demonstrate good judgment and to avoid the appearance of impropriety in their interactions with students. Employees must consult their supervisor anytime they suspect or are unsure whether conduct is inappropriate or otherwise constitutes a violation of this or other board policy. For the purposes of this policy, the term staff and employees include independent contractors and school safety officers, but do not include student employees. All employees are prohibited from dating, courting or entering into a romantic relationship or having sexual contact with any student enrolled in the school system regardless of the student's age. Employees engaging in such inappropriate conduct shall be subject to disciplinary action, up to and including dismissal, and may be subject to criminal action as provided in GS 14202.4 and 1427.7. Further, school system personnel shall provide no assistance to an employee in finding another job, beyond the routine transmittal of personnel or administrative files, if the employee engaged in sexual misconduct with a minor or a student in violation of the law. In accordance with Policy 7335, Employee Use of Social Media, employees are prohibited from communicating with current students through non-school controlled social media without parental permission except to the extent that the employee and student have an appropriate relationship which originated outside of the school setting. Any communication through social media authorized under Policy 7335 must meet the professional standards established in this policy and must otherwise be consistent with law and all other board policy. Instant messages will be treated as a form of communication through social media subject to the terms of Policy 7335 and subsection B.1 above, regardless of whether the messaging service is actually provided through a social media service or otherwise. Employees are prohibited from engaging in other forms of one-to-one electronic communications, for example, voice, voicemail, email, texting, and photo or video transmission, with the students without prior approval of the employee's supervisor and the student's parent. This rule shall not apply, however, if one or more of the following circumstances exist. The communication, 1, is for an educational purpose, 2, is conducted through a school system-provided platform which archives all such communications for a period of at least 3 years. This requirement does not apply to telephone or voicemail communications, and 3, occurs after the employee has given prior notice to his or her supervision or designee that such communications will occur. The communication serves an educational purpose and is simultaneously copied or transmitted to the employee's supervisor or designee and, upon request, to the parent or guardian. The communication is necessary in a bona fide emergency, provided the communication is disclosed to the supervisor and parent or guardian as soon as reasonably possible, or the communication derives from a relationship or association outside of the school setting and occurs with the consent of the parent or guardian, provided such communication does not otherwise violate this or other board policy. Any one-to-one electronic communication permitted by this subsection must meet the professional standards established in this policy and must otherwise be consistent with law and all other board policies. It is the duty of every employee to notify his or her supervisor on any unsolicited one-to-one communication, in any form, electronic or otherwise, received from a student when the communication lacks a clear educational purpose. School counselors are excluded from this requirement only to the extent that it conflicts with their professional duties. Violations of this section will be considered unprofessional behavior subject to discipline, up to and including dismissal. Factors that may be relevant to the determination of an appropriate disciplinary response to unauthorized communications with students include, but are not limited to, the content, frequency, subject, and timing of the communications. Whether the communications was appropriate to the student's age and maturity level. Whether the communications could reasonably be viewed as a solicitation of sexual contact or the courting of a romantic relationship, including sexual grooming. Whether there was an attempt to conceal the communications from the employee's supervisor and/or the student's parent or guardian. Whether the communications created a disruption of the educational environment, and whether the communications harmed the student in any manner. Reporting inappropriate conduct. Reporting by employees. Any employee who has reason to believe any of the following shall immediately report that information to the superintendent or designee. That another employee is involved in a romantic or other inappropriate relationship or has had sexual contact with a student. That another employee has engaged in other behavior prohibited by this policy, or that the employee has witnessed behavior by another employee that has the appearance of impropriety, whether or not the behavior may have a valid purpose. An employee who fails to inform the superintendent or designee as provided in this section may be subject to disciplinary action, up to and including dismissal. Reporting by students. Any student who believes that he or she or another student has been subject to misconduct that violates this policy should immediately report the situation to the principal, school counselor, or the Title IX coordinator designated in Policy 1720/4015/7225, Discrimination, Harassment, and Bullying Complaint Procedure. Report of criminal misconduct. Any principal who has reason to believe that a student has been the victim of criminal conduct shall immediately report the incident in accordance with Policy 4335, Criminal Behavior. Report to State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Any administrator, including the superintendent, a deputy/associate/assistant superintendent, a personal administrator, or a principal, who knows or has reason to believe that a licensed employee has engaged in conduct which involves physical or sexual abuse of a child shall report that information to the State Superintendent of Public Instruction within 5 working days of any disciplinary action, dismissal, or resignation based on the conduct. For purposes of this subsection, physical abuse is the infliction of physical injury other than by accidental means or in self-defense, and sexual abuse is the commission of any sexual act upon a child or causing a child to commit a sexual act, regardless of consent and the age of the child. Failure to report such conduct may result in the suspension or revocation of an administrator's license by the State Board of Education. This reporting requirement applies in addition to any duty to report suspected child abuse in accordance with state law and Policy 4247-312, Child Abuse, Reports and Investigations, as applicable.
The board recognizes the importance of incorporating current technology tools, including new methods of electronic communication, into the classroom to enhance student learning. It further recognizes the importance of employees, students and parents engaging, learning, collaborating and sharing in digital environments as part of 21st century learning. The board strives to ensure that electronic communication tools incorporated into the school curriculum are used responsibly and safely. As practicable, the board will provide access to secure social media tools and board-approved technologies for use during instructional time and for school-sponsored activities in accordance with Policies 3220, Technology in the Educational Program, and 3225/4312/7320, Technology Responsible Use. The board acknowledges that school employees may engage in the use of social media during their personal time. School employees who use social media for personal purposes must be mindful that they are responsible for their public conduct even when not acting in their capacities as school system employees. All school employees, including student teachers and independent contractors, shall comply with the requirements of this policy when using electronic social media for personal purposes. In addition, all school employees must comply with Policy 4047-310, Staff-Student Relations, when communicating with individual students through other electronic means, such as through voice, email, or text messaging. For the purposes of this policy, social media refers to the various online technology tools that enable people to communicate easily over the internet to share information and resources. It includes, but is not limited to, personal websites, blogs, wikis, social networking sites, online forums, virtual worlds, video sharing websites, and any other internet-based applications which allow the exchange of user-generated content. For purposes of this policy, it also includes any form of instant or direct messaging available through such applications. Examples of social media include Web 2.0 tools, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Flickr, YouTube, Instagram, Google+, and social media components of learning management systems such as Moodle or Edmodo. School-controlled social media. School-controlled social media are social media networks, tools, or activities that are under the direct control and management of the school system and that create an archived audit trail. Personal social media. Personal social media means any social media networks, tools, or activities that are not school-controlled. Employees are to maintain professional relationships with students at all times in accordance with Policies 4047-310, Staff-Student Relations, and 7300, Staff Responsibilities. The use of electronic media for communicating with students and parents is an extension of the employee's workplace responsibilities. Accordingly, the board expects employees to use professional judgment when using social media or other electronic communications and to comply with the following. All electronic communications with students who are currently enrolled in the school system must be school-related and within the scope of the employee's professional responsibilities, unless otherwise authorized by this policy or Policy 4047-310, Staff-Student Relations. School employees may use only school-controlled social media to communicate directly with current students about school-related matters. For information regarding communication with students through other forms of electronic communication, for example, email or texts, see Policy 4047-310, Staff-Student Relations. Employees are prohibited from knowingly communicating with current students through personal social media without parental permission. An internet posting on a personal social media website intended for a particular student will be considered a form of direct communication with that student in violation of this policy unless the parent has consented to the communication. However, an employee may communicate with a student using personal social media to the extent the employee and student have a family relationship or other type of appropriate relationship which originated outside of the school setting. For example, an employee may have a relationship with a niece or nephew, a student who is the child of an adult friend, a student who is a friend of the employee's child, or a member or participant in the same civic, social, recreational, sport or religious organization. An employee seeking to utilize and/or establish a non-school controlled social media website for instructional or other school-related purposes must have prior written approval from the principal and the superintendent or designee, and must verify that the social media application's terms of service meet the requirements of Policies 3220, Technology in the Educational Program, 3225/4312/7320, Technology Responsible of Use, and 3227/7322, Web Page Development. If the website collects personal information from students under the age of 13, the use will not be approved unless the applicable requirements of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA, are met. The employee shall ensure that the website does not include or link to the employee's personal social media footprint. The site must be used for school-related purposes only. The board respects the right of employees to use social media as a medium of self-expression on their personal time. As role models for the school system students, however, employees are responsible for their public conduct even when they are not performing their job duties as employees of the school system. Employees will be held to the same professional standards in their public use of social media and other electronic communications as they are for any other public conduct. Further, school employees remain subject to applicable state and federal laws, board policies, administrative regulations and the Code of Ethics for North Carolina educators, even if communicating with others concerning personal and private matters. If an employee's use of social media interferes with the employee's ability to effectively perform his or her job duties, the employee is subject to disciplinary action, up to and including termination of employment. Employees are responsible for the content on their social media sites, including content added by the employee's friends or members of the public who can access the employee's site, and for web links on the employee's site. Employees shall take reasonable precautions, such as using available security settings, to manage students' access to the employee's personal information on social media websites and to prevent students from accessing materials that are not age-appropriate. School employees are prohibited from accessing social networking websites for personal use during instructional time. Employees who use social media for personal purposes must be aware that the content they post may be viewed by anyone, including students, parents and community members. Employees shall observe the following principles when communicating through social media. Employees shall not post confidential information about students, employees or school system business. Employees shall not accept current students as friends or followers or otherwise connect with students on their personal social media sites without parental permission, unless the employee and the student have a family relationship or other type of appropriate relationship which originated outside of the school setting. Employees shall not knowingly allow students access to their personal social media sites that discuss or portray sex, nudity, alcohol or drug use or other behaviors associated with the employee's private lives that would be inappropriate to discuss with a student at school. Employees may not knowingly grant students access to any portions of their personal social media sites that are not accessible to the general public without parental permission, unless the employee and student have a family relationship or other type of appropriate relationship which originated outside of the school setting. Employees shall be professional in all internet postings related to or referencing the school system, students or their parents, and other employees. Employees shall not use profane, pornographic, obscene, indecent, lewd, vulgar or sexually offensive language, pictures or graphics or other communication that could reasonably be anticipated to cause a substantial disruption to the school environment. Employees shall not use the school system's logo or other copyrighted material of the system on a personal social media site without express, written consent from the board. Employees shall not post identifiable images of a student or student's family on a personal social media site without permission from the student and the student's parent or legal guardian. Employees may post such images on a school-controlled social media site only with prior permission of the employee's supervisor and in accordance with the requirements of federal and state privacy laws and Policy 4700, Student Records. Employees shall not use Internet postings to libel or defame the board, individual board members, students or other school employees. Employees shall not use Internet postings to harass, bully or intimidate students or other employees in violation of Policy 1710/4021/7230, Prohibition against discrimination, harassment, and bullying, or state and federal laws. Employees shall not post content that negatively impacts their ability to perform their jobs. Employees shall not use Internet postings to engage in any other conduct that violates board policy or administrative procedures or state and federal laws. School system personnel shall monitor online activities of employees who access the Internet using school technological resources. Additionally, the superintendent or designee may periodically conduct public Internet searches to determine if an employee has engaged in conduct that violates this policy. Any employee who has been found by the superintendent to have violated this policy may be subject to disciplinary action, up to and including dismissal. The superintendent shall establish and communicate to employees guidelines that are consistent with this policy.
The board believes that the appearance and the conduct of its employees are of supreme importance in establishing a positive climate for learning and for presenting a good example for students. Therefore, the board affirms its expectations that all personnel shall be cleanly, neatly, and appropriately attired for the work to be done. An employee's dress must not disrupt or distract from the educational process and must be in accordance with health and safety standards and practices. Employee dress and appearance is important to the school system's climate and should be professional, and enhance rather than detract from that climate. Dress and appearance, including footwear, should be appropriate, based on the following factors: the nature and environment of the work, health and safety factors, the nature of the employee's public contact and the normal expectations of outside parties with whom the employee will work, the employee's interaction with students, the effect of inappropriate dress on school climate. Based on these factors, the following guidelines are established. It is expected that an employee's dress or appearance will not disrupt the educational process. Employees shall be clean, neat, and appropriately attired. The dress and appearance of employees should be appropriate to the type of work performed, with reasonable accommodation when the nature of an employee's work is unique. Uniform dress may be required for certain categories of employees such as food service and maintenance personnel. The following are considered inappropriate for employees: clothing which is revealing, bare midriffs, shirts with spaghetti straps, low-cut necklines, shorts, or skirts that are shorter than knee length. Clothing which, by word or symbol, promotes alcoholic beverages, tobacco or the use of controlled substances, or that contains profanity or nudity, depicts violence or is sexual in nature. Clothing which reveals undergarments. Jewelry affixed to the body other than to the ears. Body art which is disruptive or obscene. Clothing which is tattered or ragged. Clothing which disrupts or is provocative by being overly tied to the body. Blue denim pants or shorts, commonly known as blue jeans. Any item of clothing that creates a disruption in the school environment or learning activities, or that poses a threat to the safety and well-being of students or staff. Administrative and supervisory personnel shall set a good example in personal appearance and good manners and shall encourage and expect employees to dress in accordance with the board's expectations. The principal or supervisor may approve variations in employee dress for special situations such as field trips, spirit days, class or team days, work days, when there are no parent conferences or meetings involving the public, or for those individuals whose responsibilities may necessitate an alternate form of dress such as physical education teachers, vocational education instructors, coaches, and auxiliary personnel. Reasonable accommodations shall be made by the appropriate supervisor for those employees who, because of a sincerely held religious belief or medical reason, request a waiver of a particular part of this policy for dress or appearance. An employee's immediate supervisor shall make an initial determination of whether an employee's dress or appearance is a violation of guidelines. If the supervisor determines that the employee's dress or appearance is inappropriate, the supervisor shall counsel the employee regarding appropriate attire that is consistent with this policy and shall determine whether the employee is allowed to remain at work or must leave work to change his/her dress. Any failure to follow the supervisor's directive and/or blatant violation or repeated violations of this policy may subject the employee to disciplinary action.
The board recognizes that cellular phones have become an important tool through which people communicate in the 21st century. Therefore, it is expected that a majority of staff members possess cellular phones and other wireless communication devices on school property. Wireless communication devices include, but are not limited to, cellular phones, paging devices, two-way radios, iPad, iPod and other similar devices. In accordance with Policy Code Number 3000, Goals and Objectives of the Educational Program, the use of wireless communication devices that impede an employee from performing the essential and secondary functions of his/her job is strictly forbidden. Further, classroom teachers should ensure such devices are secured, in the off, silent position, and not in use during the instructional time. If a device is to be used for an instructional activity, prior approval should be obtained from the principal. Violations of this policy will be handled according to established employee disciplinary procedures.
All employees are expected to be present during all working hours. Except during illness or extraordinary circumstances, employees must provide notice of an intended absence at least 10 days prior to the absence. Requests for such absences must be made to and approved by the employee's immediate supervisor. If the request is denied, the employee may appeal the decision to the person who supervises the employee's supervisor. All staff members must have permission from the principal before leaving school during the school day. Absence without prior approval, chronic absences, habitual tardiness or abuses of designated working hours are all considered neglect of duty and will result in disciplinary action up to and including dismissal.
Employees and board members have an absolute duty to maintain the confidentiality of records as required by law. Employees and board members, by the nature of their positions, are exposed to confidential information that should not be repeated or discussed except with those recognized by law as having a right to the information. Any employee or board member who is not sure whether particular information may be protected by state or federal confidentiality laws should seek clarification from his or her immediate supervisor or the Director of Human Resources, for employees, or from the superintendent or board attorney, for board members. When violations occur, appropriate disciplinary action will be taken. It is a criminal violation for an employee or board member to do either of the following: knowingly, willfully and with malice permit any unauthorized person to have access to information contained in a personnel file, or, knowingly and willfully examine, remove or copy a personnel file that he or she is not specifically authorized to access pursuant to GS 115C321.